Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 704. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about pints and piers and Iron Age forts and cliffs and authors and the world's longest pub crawl as we hike the South Downs Way in southern England. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about the South Downs Way. I'd like to welcome to the show Aaron Millar from the Armchair Explorer podcast at armchair-explorer.com, who's come to talk to us about hiking the South Downs Way in England. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Well, and Aaron, why are we talking about the South Downs Way, and can you put it on a map for us first?
First of all, I come from this area, so I'm passionate about it. The South Downs Way is, I think, one of the most beautiful but lesser known hikes in England. It's in the south of England. It's a 100-mile footpath that stretches from Eastbourne, which is south of London, right on the coast, and it goes 100 miles west to Winchester. And it's a beautiful route because it follows the spine of the South Downs the entire way.
And the South Downs being a series of hills and mountains. Well, hills. We're talking England.
The South Downs is beautiful, gentle, rolling hills that stretch all this way. And it's quintessential English landscape. When you picture that quintessential Englishness, that gentle rolling hills and arable farmland and old pubs and little tiny villages and sheep and cows. And because you're on the spine of these downs, you have this incredible view where to one side, to the south of you, is the English Channel and this sparkling blue sea. And then the other side is this, the Weald, which is this vast valley that seems to stretch on forever. And it's cookie cutter English field as far as the eye can see. And what makes this really special is it's the national trail for South Downs National Park, which is England's newest national park. I think it turns 10 this year. So it's really a working landscape for your listeners that come from the States or other places. I love the national parks in the States. I'm a huge fan. I write about them a lot. And most of them are obviously protecting these wild spaces. But the South Downs National Park is a little different. It's actually a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is an award that's not been given out to that many places. And it's to do with the relationship between a land and its people and the sustainable relationship of harmonious existence between the ecosystem and the people that live there and have lived there and worked that land for centuries and thousands of years, in fact. So what you get is this real sense of a living landscape. It's not a national park which is devoid of people and cut off from civilization. Mm-hmm. It's a national park where people have existed for thousands of years. The South Downs Way, in fact, it's been walked for at least 8,000 years. They have records of that. So when you're walking this route, you're really following in the footsteps of people that have walked that for thousands of years. There's Iron Age hill forts, there's Bronze Age burial mounds, there's Roman history. So you get a real sense of that as you walk through it. And I always feel like that history and that culture can imbue a place with depth. When you're there, you get this sense of this living landscape that is very typical of England and very friendly and welcoming. You're passing through these little villages, and it's a little off the tourist trail because I don't think many international tourists do this route. So when you're coming off the trail to stay in these pubs or these different places overnight, you're really staying in local pubs. One night I dropped down to this pub called the Five Bells, and the local cricket team was in there having their cream tea and gossiping about who bakes the best scones and all that sort of stuff. So it's really, you're eavesdropping on this little world of the south of England. And I think a lot of people, when they think of England, they think of the south of England. It's a landscape that's inspired a lot of artists over the years, for everyone from Virginia Woolf and the Bloomsbury Group to painters and musicians. So you really feel like you're walking through a landscape that has a lot of depth, that has a lot of texture to it. And there's a lot of great beer too. So that always helps.
Excellent. And one thing to note is when you talk about this being a national park in the UK obviously being a smaller country than the US, where I live, doesn't have as many national parks. It only has 15. So when you say it's a national park, it's one of just over a dozen national parks in both England, Scotland, and Wales altogether. So obviously 15 are the 15 best sites that were worthy of being named a national park. So where are we starting?
So there's two options. I started in Eastbourne, which is on the south coast, and made my way west from there. And I did that for a special reason, because when you do it that way, there's a really great finish to the hike, which I'll keep as a surprise for later.
Excellent.
A lot of people choose to do it the other way around. It's the same elevation, the same difficulty. I think a lot of people choose to do it the other way around because when you begin in Winchester, you slowly make your way closer and closer to the sea, and then you finish in this really dramatic finish walking towards Eastbourne in this place called the Seven Sisters, which are these beautiful chalky cliffs. That the White Cliffs of Dover are the famous cliffs on the south coast, and these are every bit as beautiful. I did it the other way, and I also did it in a very fun way. I did it as a 100-mile pub crawl. Any excuse, right?
Not in one day, we should say. We haven't put a time frame on this yet. You said this whole trip takes about...
I did it in 8 days. Some people take 9 or 10 days. It really depends on how much hiking you want to do. If you do it in 8 days, as I did, it's usually about 12 miles a day. But you have like 1 or 2 long days, which are about 17 miles.
So 12 miles a day, how many pubs a day?
If you do it as a pub crawl, you obviously wake up in one. I avoided the drinks at breakfast. The way I've plotted this route out is you then stop at one for lunch and then finish in a pub for dinner and a little bit of fun in the evening. It's a really fun way to do this. I did it because I grew up in this part of the world, and the South Downs Way has actually been a national trail since 1972. But the South Downs National Park was only formed in 2010. So when it was formed, I decided what a great idea to celebrate my home turf, as it were, becoming a national park. What a great way to celebrate that than to do a 100-mile pub crawl down the South Downs Way. I don't know if that's a record, but it's certainly the longest pub crawl I've ever done. And it's actually a really fun way to see this landscape because you're dropping into these small, quintessential little villages where you're becoming part of local life. These aren't tourist pubs. These are really local pubs. And I think that's a lovely way to see anywhere you go, any country. It's a lovely way to see it and to meet people and try and get off that tourist trail a little bit. And it's really welcoming and fun because of that. You're a bit of a novelty for some of the locals, and they usually like a bit of fun too. So it's a great way to see it.
Excellent. Well, let's get into some of the details. We're going to go east to west.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we going to do the first day?
First day, we start in Eastbourne. Eastbourne is on the coast, and you're immediately in the Seven Sisters, which is this gorgeous country park. The Seven Sisters are these 7 promontories, these 7 hills with these stark white chalky cliffs that are crumbling into the sea. And it's often windy. It's often quite dramatic there. But you have this incredible sense of openness and space. You have the sea on one side, and then you have this beautiful, lush, green, rolling hills on the other. So it's a really incredible way to start. So you follow that for about 7 miles or so, and then you reach Cookmere Haven, which when I lived in that area was my favorite summer swimming beach. So if you do go in summer and it's a nice warm day, that's a great place to stop for a picnic or have a little dip. There's a nice pub there too, the Cookmere Inn. And then from there, you follow the forest trail up to a village called Alfriston. And Alfriston, I think it was voted one year the prettiest village in England. It's almost like going back in time. Thatched roofs and the Tudor style buildings with the timber frames and winding streets and the country green with cricket going on. And it's got one of my favorite pubs. It used to be my local when I lived around there. It's called the George Inn, and the George has been a pub for 600 years. So you're in good company when you go for a pint there. And it hasn't really changed that much in 600 years either. I mean, I'm 5'10", and I have to duck the entire way through it. The ceilings are really low and the floors are higgledy-piggledy. But the beer's great and the food's great. It's a beautiful place. And there's an option to stay the night there. That's a really great option. They have lovely rooms. I went on from there to another amazing pub. So from Alfriston, this is when you get on the downs proper. And I climbed up to the kind of the spine of the downs, and you get your first view stretching west. And it's really one of those views where you're looking into infinity. You can see these rolling hills disappearing into the horizon. And I followed that to a village called Firle, which has a pub called the Ram Inn. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous pub. It was a lot of fun because I arrived, and it's the sort of place that has live music every night, but just impromptu little jams. So I arrived, there's like a fiddle band playing in one corner, and in another corner, there's these guys playing this game called Toad in the Hole, which is an ancient medieval Sussex game. It's basically throwing a coin onto a board. But it's that kind of place, and food's amazing. It has this award-winning beer garden. So you're just sitting there after your first day, and you've got a good chunk of miles in, and that pint feels incredible. So that's your first day.
And before you get to your second day, I want to talk a little bit about logistics here. Am I carrying my gear with me? Did I ship it from one pub ahead to where I'm staying the next night? How are we doing that logistically?
It's a great question. So I carry everything with me. I think you don't have to take very much if you're going pub to pub. I had a hiking outfit and then an evening outfit and then all the usual hiking stuff. Bring wet weather gear. You never know what you're going to get.
No bad weather, only inappropriate clothing.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I had a relatively light pack, but there are operators who do that luggage transfer. So if you want to do it in a way that's a little more comfortable and have a little bit of a lighter day pack, that's absolutely possible too. With any long distance hike, I always recommend to people to carry as little as you can because the lighter the pack, the more fun it is, really.
Okay, excellent. You're starting the second day.
Yeah, so second day you wake up, and this day is really all about the artistic history of the South Downs because you're starting in this village called Firle, and right next to that place called Charleston House, which was the home of the Bloomsbury Group, who were these incredible early 20th century writers, T.S. Eliot, E.M. Forster, Virginia Woolf. So that's a nice stop off. And then as you get back on the Downs, I should say logistically as well, the South Downs Way is 100 miles, but because it follows the spine of the Downs, there's no pubs or campsites or anything up there. So you have to come down off the trail every night, back up on the trail, following this beautiful walk. Eventually you come down naturally and into this village where Virginia Woolf lived, and that's her house there, Monk's House. Rodwell is the name of the village. And then you finish the day in one of my favorite places in the world. It's called Devil's Dyke. It was named after a myth that the devil forged this very sharp, dramatic, V-shaped valley, evidently on one of his nicer days, because it really is a beautiful place. From the top of that, you get this incredible view of the Weald, this valley that stretches north. And it is an incredible view. And the painter, John Constable, called it the grandest view in the world. And you can see what inspired that and what inspired some of his painting. And you can get a feel and see what inspired some of those writers too. So it's a really amazing stop, a really great hike. And the other thing that's great about that day is you pass a place called Ditchling Beacon. And what's really interesting about that, it's one of the highest points on the walk. So you get a lovely view. But what's really interesting about that too is Ditchling Beacon is one of a number of beacons that were actually used in the Tudor era, Queen Elizabeth's era, as a warning system for the Spanish Armada approaching. So when they saw the Spanish Armada approaching, the idea was they would light the first fire by the coast at the top of the downs, and the next beacon along would see that fire, spread the word. So it's cool to think of the people standing in those beacons looking out at sea, the same view that you're looking out and watching for those Spanish ships. So yeah, that's a really fun day. That's a great day. And you finish that day in a really nice pub too.
Well, and I wanted to mention, you said it's one of the highest points in the South Downs, and let's put some elevation on that. It's about 270 meters or almost 900 feet. So again, it's very different from the episode we did recently on Kilimanjaro. We're not going to be talking about altitude sickness here.
Everything is relative. And that's one of the nice things about the hike too. It's a very gentle hike. I mean, there are a few places where it's a rolling hike, so you're going up and down, but it's all very gentle throughout. And so it's a really attainable hike. Anyone can do this, even though it's a long distance. You've got to cover a few miles each day. It's really, really attainable. And if you break it up, you stop for a nice lunch, it's a pretty easy hike, and it's a lot of fun to do. It's not about challenging yourself. It's really about enjoying it, a nice pace along the way.
Well, and with the pace that you're setting, is there time that when I walk past Monk House, I can go in and see it? Is that built into the time period you're talking about, for instance?
Absolutely. And I totally recommend that. It's that kind of walk.
Okay.
What I did was I would have a nice, leisurely, full English breakfast. Viewers aren't familiar with that. It's the classic English breakfast of sausage and bacon and beans on toast. And it's a decent hiker's breakfast. You're not going to run out of calories before lunch. And then walk for a bit, see a few sights, stop and hang around, have a nice leisurely lunch, and then maybe a couple of hours to finish. So it's a really nice paced walk and definitely time to see stuff along the way.
Excellent. Where to next?
And the next couple of days follows the Downs. We're passing some of the bigger cities in the area, Brighton, where I actually grew up, to the south, and then Lewis, lovely town, really interesting castle there. If you had a bit more time, you could veer off and detour and see some of those. I recommend if you want to do this trip and have a day either side, Brighton's a pretty good base to do that. It's a really fun town. But yeah, you're following this spine of the Downs, and then you've come to this place called Chanctonbury Ring, which for me, it's this kind of mythical place. It's a ring of trees that someone planted a few hundred years ago. And there's so many rumors and myths around it. It's rumored that if you walk around the ring anti-clockwise on a dark night, the devil will come and offer you a cup of soup. And when I did it, it was quite cold and foggy and really atmospheric, and I was completely on my own. It was late in the day. So I quite fancied a cup of soup. So I was like, well, maybe I'll give that a shot. But I settled for one in the nearby village instead. But it's a really interesting place. I've done this walk other times and found modern day pagans. And so people claim there's all sorts of UFO sightings. So it's kind of a fun place to stop and soak up some of that history and some of that madness.
Well, and you mentioned history, but it's an old prehistoric hill fort.
Originally, yes. It was built on the site of a hill fort. And I think it was a couple hundred years ago they planted these trees, but no one really knows why. We had a big storm, a gale blow through in 87 that knocked some of it down, but it still stands there. And it is quite sort of mysterious when you're there. And then you arrive the end of day 4, as I did it, in this village of Amberley, which, like Alfriston, is the most beautiful thatched cottage village you could ever imagine. And I stayed at a pub called the Sportsman, which has this gorgeous garden overlooking this meadow with deer grazing, and there was an eagle flying in the sky, a white-tailed eagle. So just a lovely, peaceful place. And I think one of the things about this hike throughout is so many long-distance hikes can be intimidating to people because you're conquering mountains, you're climbing stuff. This is a very peaceful, calming walk. And I think that you really get that from the landscape. There's a nice slow pace to the land, which harks back to that biosphere reserve. People have lived in harmony with the land in this place for thousands of years. And you get that sense of peace and contentment when you walk it. And so there's lots of those little spots, which I really love. So that was day 3 and day 4. There's some nice pubs along the way. The Checkers Inn, this 15th century coaching in another nice town called Stenning. But after that, you wake up on day 5, and that's when you have what they call the Wall of Death. There are a lot of mountain bikers too. And this, like, again, it isn't Kilimanjaro. So a lot of things are relative. A lot of people bike this as well, mountain bike this. And it's pretty much straight up, and it can be muddy and slippery. So it can be tricky. But it's a really fascinating day because this is when you see a lot of the Roman history. So you pass by, it's a little off the trail, but it's really worth the detour, this place called Bigner Villa. And it's this Roman villa from around about 350 AD, and it has the most gorgeous mosaic, absolutely intact mosaics on the floor. And then at the top of the hill, you're following this path called Stane Street, which was an old Roman road, and it just goes dead straight as the Romans did. And so you're dipping in and out of these little bits of history, which is really fun too. You end that day, you go through this forest called the Gratham Downs, beautiful mossy forest, and there's these Bronze Age burial mounds there called the Devil's Jumps. There's burial mounds throughout the place. Some of them are really hard to find because really they're these mounds that are now grown over grass or trees or brush. But these ones are really obvious, and so that's cool too. So you're kind of going from the Romans to the Bronze Age, which is pretty cool in one day.
Well, in fact, the ring of, and I've forgotten the name of it, up on the mountain,
Chanctonbury Ring.
Yeah, also had burial downs on it. So yeah,
they're all over the place.
Yep.
Obviously, being the high ground, it was a place that was strategically good for people. It was also drier and easier to get around. So that's the reason why it's been so well used over the last 8,000 years or so.
Excellent. And where are we ending that day?
We end that day in a village called Cocking, which is on a main road. So it wasn't my favorite stop, but the pub is great food, amazing food. And so like once you're inside, and really nice, beautiful design too. I think the accommodation throughout is comfortable and friendly and welcoming, but like one or two of the pubs are like really gorgeous boutique-y type hotels as well. This is the midway point where you're spoiling yourself with a really nice room and a good steak dinner or something like that too. So you finish there.
You didn't say which pub was in town. I'm guessing it's the Bluebell?
It's the Bluebell. You've done your research, sir.
It's the only pub in town, I understand. Which is why you didn't say.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to find that one. Yeah, the Bluebell. It's a good pub and definitely worth a stop. Yeah, the next couple of days, you're into the hike now. And highlight for me was Old Winchester Hill, which is, we spoke about these Iron Age forts, and there's a lot of them throughout this walk. And some are more obvious than others. But this, for me, I got a real sense climbing up to that fort of what it would be like to have lived there. You can still see this large scar where this fort was. I always love standing in places like that and imagining what it was like 2,500 years ago with someone looking at that view and what they saw, and how could they have ever predicted me being there or all that's happened in that place since then. It's a really interesting place. And from there, you roll down into this gorgeous pub, this called the Royal Oak, which is this 15th century pub, and it's tucked away in the trees. It's almost a little fairy den or something like that. You come through the forest, and there's suddenly this clearing, and there's this magical little pub. And when I did it, the sun was shining, and it was shining through the dappled leaves in the trees. And it's like, wow, this is the most magical little place. So you stop for a pint there and a good lunch, and you drag yourself away, and then you have to climb Buster Hill, which is the highest point in the hike, but it's still a beautiful hike and not too hard, relatively speaking. So I finished that day in a really fun pub called the Five Bells. And this was a quintessential English local village pub. You're part of the family when you're there.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those places where you open the door and everything stops. The dartboard stops playing and the pool thing stops going, and everyone looks around and like, this is someone we don't know. What's going on here? But pretty soon you're sat down in the bar and you've made 30 new friends, and you're adjudicating on who does the best cream teas and who bakes the best scones, and you're getting invited around someone's house. And it's one of those places. So, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, I think traveling is about that anyway. We always try and plan the big sites, the things that you definitely want to do. And while those are great, it's great to see Bignor Villa. It's great to see the old Winchester Hill Fort and all these things. But in the end, oftentimes it's the little things that stick with you, isn't it? It's that person you met, that pint you shared. And so that's one of those places.
Well, and I want you to help me get ready for my pub experience in England. I've spent time in pubs in Ireland more than I have in England. In Ireland, I'm expecting more live music and things like that. Do I need to get better at darts? Do I need to brush up on English football?
And well done with the calling it football, by the way.
I almost slipped. Do I need terms like this, or what do I need to do to prepare?
I think a lot of Americans have to prepare for warm beer. I think that's one of the things.
Well, there's that.
The benefit is if it's cold enough on the hike, even if you go in summer, you can get a cold, windy day, and maybe you actually look forward to the warm beer a little bit.
Is there a particular beer that you would recommend as someone who grew up in this region that I should order?
Yeah, gosh, you got to try Harvey's. I think pretty much every pub will have Harvey's. It's a brewery that's based in one of these towns that you pass, and it's more than 100 and something years old.
So it's a new beer.
Brewing the same beer for over 100 years, so they know what they're doing with that one now. And it's the classic Sussex beer. It's a proper ale, so don't expect any bubbles or any fizz, and you pour it in the proper pull draft, and it's a lovely beer. And if you come at the right time of year, they do specials, which are really nice.
And I'm assuming every beer has the appropriate glass?
You've got to have the proper mug, haven't you? Or even I forgot what it's called, the proper beer mugs, the pewters, or I think they're called. But if you were to bring your own beer mug, then I think you'd fit right in, Chris.
Okay.
But it's a little bit of added weight, isn't it? So I don't know.
And pub food, you mentioned Toad in the Hole as a game. I know it as a food. Should I expect traditional pub food down here in Sussex, or are there starting to be more of a variety? Am I going to have bangers and mash and shepherd's pie, or what am I ordering?
Well, if you're like me, you'll probably order bangers and mash and shepherd's pie and some sort of pie every day just for the sake of it, because
pie pasty.
It's yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's guilt-free gluttony is the way I look
Got
at it, because you're burning off enough calories that you can eat whatever you like by the end of the day. But yeah, the food is delicious. There are a few places where you can get some fancier stuff, but you're always going to get those classic pub staples but really farm to table. I think that's one of the new things that's big about this area is very, very local produce and very fresh. So most of the pubs are really, really good food, and they'll make classic English staples, but they'll do them really, really well, and you won't be disappointed. But yeah, get prepared for that big breakfast. There's one place I stayed, the Checker Inn in Stedding, that they actually call their breakfast Armageddon. It has its own Hollywood-style catchphrase. If this was the last breakfast you had on Earth, this is what you would eat. Essentially like a whole pig farm on toast. But get prepared for those big brekkies, and you'll be all right.
Well, you know the joke about Europe and the difference between heaven and hell, don't you?
No, I don't think I do, actually. No.
I don't know if I've told this. I'm sure I've told this on the show once in the last 700 episodes. The story, as I understand it, is that in heaven, the British are the police, and the Swiss are the bankers, and the Italians are the lovers, and the French are the cooks, and the Germans are the mechanics. And in hell, the Germans are the police, and the Swiss are the lovers, and the Italians are the mechanics, and the French are the bankers, and the British are the cooks.
I love that. I love that. It's so true too, isn't it? Stereotypes, but they come from somewhere, don't they?
There are things we love about all of those countries and all of those people, and there are other things that could use a little improvement.
I'm going to steal that one from you, Chris. I like that.
I stole it from someone else years ago. I don't know who that's from.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. So, yes, you're coming to the end of the route once you pass this village of Burton and the Five Bells. And And the last day going into Winchester is really fun because you see the spires of Winchester Cathedral from miles away. So for the first time, you get that sense of, I'm almost there. I can see it in the distance. And it's an incredible finish. And this is the reason why I did it, because, I mean, Winchester's a really great town anyway. There's Winchester Cathedral. This was the seat of King Arthur, first king of England. And there's so much history around that too there. It's a beautiful old city. But there's this really special place. The official route of the South Downs ends at the Old City Mill. So you follow this path towards Fleet Castle and follow the river and you reach this Old City Mill. And if you actually go in there and you tell them that you completed the South Downs Way, they'll give them your name. They'll send you a completion certificate and all of that, which is quite nice. But there's an older finish to it, which is much more appropriate, especially for a pub crawl, and a lot more fun. So instead of finishing there, you carry on to the Hospital of St. Cross, which is about another mile into the city. And there's an abbey there, which for the last 800, 900 years has been offering travelers that knock on the abbey door, the monks there offer them what's called the Wayfarer's Dole, which is a sip of beer and a slice of bread. And they've been doing this for more than 800 years. And if you knock on the abbey door to this day and you say, I've just walked the South Downs Way and I'm humbly requesting the Wayfarer's Dole, they will still give you that piece of bread and that sip of beer. And I tell you what, that was the best pint I had in the whole 100-mile pub crawl.
Huh. Interesting. As we think about the whole thing, now we can put it in perspective. We talked about it from start to finish. You're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
I think I'm standing in Devil's Dyke.
Okay.
There's a pub there. You've taken your pint, and even though you're not supposed to, you've walked across the car park and you've walked down the hill slightly, and there's a spot just down the hill where you can sit on the grass and there's no one else around, and you've got your pint on you and you're looking out, and in one direction you can see for miles and miles the South Downs kind of disappearing into the horizon, and the other direction is this perfect English countryside, cookie cutter fields and farmers working their fields, and there's sheep and cows and old churches, and you can see it all and take it all in at once. And because this valley stretches on as far as you can see, and you're up higher, it's one of those places where the sky feels enormous, and there's this incredible sense of openness, and at the same time this incredible sense of peace and calm. Such a beautiful combination.
Best pub on the route.
Oh my God, that's a tough one.
Yes,
that's a tough one.
There's fighting words here.
Other than the Wayfarer's Dole, which isn't a pub, but it's the best sip of beer you'll have, I would say.
Now, is it the best because of the beer or the best because you've accomplished the task?
Definitely not because of the beer.
Okay. That's what I was assuming.
More for the story and the bragging rights, I guess. But I have a couple of favorites. One is definitely the George Inn. I mean, I would say if you wanted to just do a section of this walk, if you didn't want to do the whole thing, but you wanted to get a taste of it, the start that I did from Eastbourne to the George, up the Seven Sisters, through Cookmere Haven, and ending in Alfriston is a beautiful hike, and probably I would say one of the most beautiful days on the whole South Downs Way. And it's a great pub to finish and stay in, because it's the most bizarre place in some ways, because it's so small. The ceilings are small, and you have to step over these beams that are still on the floor for some reason, and the fireplace is enormous and made obviously stone, and you get a real sense there more than anywhere else, I think, about how old these pubs are and how long people have been walking this footpath for. And I think that's one of the reasons why you do it. None of these pubs would be here. This pub crawl wouldn't be possible if this wasn't an historic walk, because they've been there for centuries, because people have been walking this route as a trading route or as a drover's trail for centuries. And so I think there almost more than anywhere, you get a real sense of that, which is beautiful. Some close runners up though. I thought the Ram Inn in Firle is great. And again, if you're a fan of any of those writers, the Bloomsbury Group and Virginia Woolf, that's a wonderful place to be, because I always think that when you look at a view, when you look at a place, if you've read something about it, it gives that view so much more depth than just what you see with your eyes. And I think it's so great to read those greats and then go and see the place where they wrote that and see the places that inspired some of that. And that fills out those views and those landscapes even more and gives you a wonderful sense of time and place, which I love. So that's a great day too. It's the movement too. I think that one of the things I love about doing long distance hikes is you're seeing the world at the pace of your own 2 feet. You're seeing it at a pace that human beings have evolved to understand the world. So I grew up in this place and I didn't hike it until my early 30s. And I really didn't feel like I understood how big it was until I walked this route. I'd taken the train and driven all around it, of course, but you don't really get a sense of place, a deep place, until you've walked it, I think. So one of the things I loved about it was the time to slow down and spend that long with a place was a wonderful luxury and treat, and something that's really stayed with me ever since.
Now, we're down here in the south of England. There are other things to see down here. You mentioned Brighton, and we've got Portsmouth over here. We've got other things in the area. If you had to tack on a day or two, one side or the other, where would you spend them?
I think a lot of people will want to spend an extra couple of days at Winchester. And one, because you're going to get there late and it's a wonderful town. There's lots to see there. So that's going to be a day. But less than half an hour away is Salisbury Cathedral, Stonehenge.
Sure.
So wonderful sites that you can see there too. So a couple of days there is great. If you're flying in internationally, I would say that it's easier to fly to London Gatwick than Heathrow, unless you're obviously seeing London, because Gatwick's really close to Brighton. It's really easy to get the train to Brighton. And that's a great way to start too. So if you've done London or you want to see something different, I think Brighton's probably a really good base. It's a classic English seaside town. It has a pier. It has an enormous beach, but it's a stony beach. It's all made of stones, and classic English seaside holiday. It's a really fun town. There's great food. There's these little winding lanes, which are these narrow pedestrianized lanes where they have like really fun shops and stuff. And it's a great fun town. So I would say that's a good base as well. If you did it the other way, perhaps, and finished in Eastbourne, that's a good tack on. Or if you wanted to come straight down there and not do London, I'd say Brighton would be a great base. And then you could spend a couple of days and then head off from there.
And I love the fact that you were saying that Gatwick is close to there versus Heathrow, which is really still close to there. This is not a big country. I know it's coworker when I was working at timeout.com in the heart of London who was commuting in every day from Brighton. And other than his complaints about the British rail system in southern England, most of the time it works just fine. And it took him an hour or something like that. So not difficult.
It's true. But, the one thing I would say about Heathrow going to the south is it's a bit of a pain if you've got big bags, because you've got to go all the way on the Heathrow Express to Paddington, and then you've got to get across London to Victoria, taxi or a tube. So it's a bit of a hassle, whereas Gatwick, you're half an hour straight down.
Yep.
Potentially easier for people.
Because the trains that run to the south run from Victoria Station.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And us Brits, we love a good moan about just about anything, but the weather, food, but trains particularly get it pretty bad from us. So
excellent. Our guest again has been Aaron Millar from the Armchair Explorer podcast, which is a relatively new podcast. I assume you can find it wherever podcasts can be found, Aaron?
You can indeed. Yeah, you can find it anywhere you like. Love to come and hang out. Love to hang out and go on some adventures with you.
And I know you haven't done a whole lot of episodes yet. Have you done one on Southern England yet?
No. The format for the show is I invite different adventurers, the world's greatest adventurers, on and tell their story. So I did tell one story, but it wasn't about the South Downs. So mostly it's people far more braver and famous and more interesting than me telling their story.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for this part of Southern England.
Oh, thanks, Chris. It's been an honor. I love your show, mate. Thank you.
And as the community, I'll put this on Patreon as well, but I'm going to be meeting with the patrons. I'm thinking next Saturday, May the 16th at 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so if that time works for those who are patrons of the show, let me know in patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I had 2 recent iTunes or Apple's podcast reviews that made me smile. The first one was from Allie the Traveler, and it rated the podcast as excellent and interesting. If possible, I would give an extra star for Chris's persistence in keeping this podcast going while many other lifestyle podcasters have gone into Corona hibernation mode. And then I also heard from Design Jeans, who said, in the midst of what will be known as the great 2020 shelter-in-place, Amateur Traveler lets me go places vicariously while helping the world flatten the curve. I especially enjoyed episode 694, Travel to Northern Pakistan. Pakistan has been on my bucket list, but for work reasons, I can't go. So until I retire, the episode will have to suffice. Keep up the great work, Chris. Well, and thanks to both of you. I found both of your reviews encouraging. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more